So I'm heading down to a little pub by the river. It's a pub that I've sketched before, but last time I got my proportions quite wrong. So I'm going to try a different technique. It's nothing completely groundbreaking or anything, it's just the opposite of how I normally do things. So let's see how we get on. I just love this time of year and the colour of the blossoms on the trees. I'm using an A4 sketchbook, but I've lightly marked out an A5 area because I tend to draw too big when I've got more space. And what I'm going to do today is try something that's backwards for me, painting first and then adding the ink in afterwards. It's quite a common way of doing things, it's just not the way that I normally do it. There's a book in the Urban Sketches series by Mike Dakibara which goes into more detail. And like I say, it's nothing particularly new, but I'd never really tried it for urban sketching. And I'm hoping that by doing it this way, and I'm really looking at the shapes and not focusing on the detail, that it might help with proportions. So let's see. Here I was aiming to leave gaps showing the white page for windows, but as you can see, I already forgot with this one. So that's something I'd need to remember to do in future. And I'm going to go through a list of the pros and cons as I find them. But I do think that the proportions already feel better. I'm just suggesting some of these pub garden benches here. Just a few lines to show the tabletop, the bench and some legs. The paints I'm using are by Sennelier with a few extra colours added, and I'm using a Pentel Waterbrush and a Sea White of Brighton A4 sketchbook. I'll put links to all the materials in the description. I've just stumbled across another advantage of working this way. I actually forgot to draw the pub sign in. If I was working in ink, I'd obviously have lines from the roof showing through, even though they should be hidden behind it. But with paint, I can just plonk it on top and get away with it. So you don't have to be quite so rigid about the order. So there are my basic shapes of the building and the windows. Because I haven't done it this way around before, I'm just struggling with whether to now switch to pen or put some more paint on, but I decided to put a bit more paint on. One of the advantages, and like I said, I will make a list of what I found the pros and cons to be, but one of the advantages I found was putting in this foliage, this sort of creeper that was going up the wall. It made it easier to be a bit looser, I think. And so far, I think it's easier to create depth with this method. Painting these boats that are in the background gives them less prominence than if I'd drawn them in with ink. And likewise with this area that leads to the car park at the back of the pub. So as you can see, I've now switched to pen, and for me that was the first disadvantage, because I had to sit and wait for the paint to dry. I know I've forgotten. Chimneys. If I do the ink first, I find the ink dries pretty much instantaneously. But here I had to make sure that the paint was bone dry, obviously, before I started putting black ink on it, which would just bleed into the paint. It wasn't so bad today because it was a sunny, breezy day, but if it had been quite a damp day, I think I'd have had quite a long wait on my hands and I'd have probably got impatient and started something else. Another thing I was not so keen on was how black the pen appeared when it was on top of the paint. So I started drawing the roof tiles and then decided they'd be far too prominent, so decided I'd come back later and fill those in with coloured pencil. Just hinting at benches. I can't really see them properly because they're sort of at eye level. In summer there's loads of parasols, I'll have to come back and do it again.
I'll just look over your shoulder.
You can. And of course somebody wants to look over your shoulder when you're trying out a new style and it all looks a little bit of a mess.
So I do a bit of drawing.
Yeah.
I'm retired and I'm going into painting.
Yeah.
But,
Hey, I'm trying a different technique, so you've seen it at its worst. It's completely new. You very kindly said my proportions were good though, so this method must be working. Nice to meet you anyway. Bye. Good, sun's out again, so quick, get those shadows in. the sun that's coming from my right, from over here. The sun's gone in again. Got to work quickly. Darken this up a bit. A little bit on the pub sign. Make it stand out a little. The pen I'm using is a Sailor Fude de Manon pen with a 40-degree bent nib, and the ink is platinum carbon water resistant ink. So once I'd finished the sketch using this method, I decided to sketch it again using my normal method of putting the ink on first, just as a comparison really. I moved to a different bench a bit further back, so I had a slightly different angle and could bring in more of the sort of surrounding objects like the railings and that red thing, I don't know what it's called, but I thought it would give a nice pop of colour. The paints I'm using this time are Winsor & Newton Professional Grade. I did add the lettering at home once everything was completely dry using the white jelly roll pen. They don't really like damp paper, well, they don't really like dry paper either in my experience half the time, but they do the job when they feel like it. So, having tried both approaches, here's what I noticed. Starting with paint and focusing on shapes definitely helped with my proportions, I think. And I think it also helped with depth, keeping background areas lighter than if I'd outlined everything in pen. Foliage felt a bit looser and it gave me more flexibility with layering, for example, adding the pub sign afterwards. On the other hand, though, I forgot to leave space for one of the windows, which was harder to fix. And I think it was quite easy to add too much paint. I don't think I left enough breathing space in this version, which would have been less likely to happen if I'd been following ink lines. Drying time can also be a bit of a nuisance, especially on a typical grey, damp UK day. And ink on top does come out very dark, as you'd expect, Although I did like using coloured pencil for some of the details, it softened things and added a bit of texture. I have to say I was expecting this method to feel looser, but I think that's a me issue really. I was still drawing with the brush rather than laying down shapes, so that's something I'd approach differently next time. I don't think I'd use this every time, but it's definitely something I'll come back to, and I'd be really interested to know if you work this way, which approach you prefer. Thanks for watching and happy sketching.